We are going to get started. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Talking with Dr. T. This is a show where we provide tips and strategies for bridging the gap between mental health, faith, and provide mental health, faith, and wellness in faith-based organizations. I am really excited tonight and honored tonight to have Dr. Cirecie A. West-Olatunji, and she currently serves as a professor at Xavier University of Louisiana and director of the Center for Traumatic Stress Research. Dr. West-Olatunji just completed her tenure as editor-in-chief of the Journal of the Multicultural Counseling and Development. She is also past president of the American Counseling Association and the Association for Multicultural Counseling and Development. Nationally, Dr. West-Olatunji has initiated several clinical research projects that focus on culture-centered community collaborations designed to address issues rooted in systemic oppression, such as transgenerational trauma and traumatic stress. Cirecie West-Olatunji has conducted commissioned research under the auspices of the National Science Foundation, ACA Foundation, Kellogg Foundation, Federal Witness Assistance Program, Spencer Foundation, the American Educational Research Association, and the African American Success Foundation. I am honored to have Dr. Cirecie West-Olatunji. So please welcome her to our show tonight, Talking with Dr. T. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. I am so excited about your internet talk show. I love how you're reaching out to the people.
Thank you very much. This started as a result of my Doctor of Ministry program at United Theological Seminary. And so we've just kind of continued with it. And so we have people who watch live tonight, but we also have people that come back and watch the recorded video. So I want to welcome those who are with us live tonight and those who may be watching the show later on. If you have questions, please put them in the chat box. We will have time for questions and answers. And also, if you are watching live on Facebook, please just use the posting on there, and I'll be keeping track of the questions. And as part of our audience, we have faith-based leaders, we have clergy, we have counseling students, psychology students, other helping professionals that are really looking to bridge the gap between faith and mental health. So with everything going on in our world right now, I thought it would be a good time for us to, you and I had this conversation back in the spring about the impact of the pandemic, COVID, and racial injustices on COVID-19. So with that being said, I just want to first start off with, how have you been doing with these double pandemics? Some people say triple pandemic now.
Exactly. Yes, I'm in the camp of the triple pandemic, or the trifecta of 2020 for us, and it's been difficult. So I would say it waxes and wanes. Sometimes things are going well, and I seem to be in a groove, and I've adapted really well to our new way of living. Basically, for me, it's shelter in place, and so some of those days are really good. Other days, not so much. Other days, I'm really struggling because I miss my family. I miss going out and socializing. I miss being with people in person and being able to relate. Of course, I live in New Orleans, where everyone's home in New Orleans is a bed and breakfast, because when people find out that you live in New Orleans, they want to come and visit. Relatives you haven't seen in 20, 30 years, all of a sudden they pop up and they want to visit because they get to come here, see you, but also enjoy the city. So I am so used to being with people face to face that it can be difficult on some days. But, I've created a regimen. I've created my self-care regimen. and ways to get the support that I need. And it's helping me to get through.
Excellent. Very good. And I'm glad. And I know, you know, we've really kind of taken advantage of this virtual environment and connecting with people virtually. And so I would ditto everything that you have said in terms of myself. And so with that being said, because we are not immune to what's happening, but let's kind of talk about what that means for people in our country right now and people across the world.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Before I do that, you know, actually, you know, because you shared with me some of the things that you might be asking, and the first thing was just me introducing myself to the topic. And so I thought it would be important before I answer that question to have people to position me, to get a sense of who am I, and so on. And so when I think about just faith and faith activities as action and mental health, I see those things coming together very nicely for me in terms of my experiences. So certainly in terms of, you know, my background, it's very stereotypical, I think, in that sense. I grew up in a Black Baptist church. And so a lot of my development, you know, places where I learned about leadership, where I learned to have confidence, where I learned to lead, those things happened in the church and the church experiences. So as we know, the Black church does more than feed souls. It also prepares us for life in many ways, in ways that oftentimes we would not have experiences in the larger world because we're being marginalized. So we may not be chosen for leadership activities, and research supports that, where when teachers are thinking about which kid should take on some leadership position in the 5th grade class, they often don't think about the little Black kid in the back. So we're often left out. We don't get to be, you know, crossing guards, you know, and things like that because we're not selected. So the Black church has been the place where we get that leadership experience, where we will learn how to do things. My parents were very involved in the church. And so, you know, I had a chance to do a bunch of stuff. So, you know, I could just rattle off, you know, all the things of, you know, playing piano for the senior choir, directing the children's choir, singing in the young adult choir, being on the junior usher board, you know, and so on. Having the opportunity to go to National Baptist conventions, and even being groomed to be able to do some sort of ministry, having done some, you know, sermonettes for the church as a young person and so on. And that carried with me. I remember being a doctoral student and taking a qualitative research course. And one of the things that I wanted to know, and because I felt it intuitively, that there's a lot of therapy that goes on in the Black church. And so I spoke with my minister and said, you know, hey, I want to collect some data. So I want to sit in the back of the church and just watch and see what things do I see. And I'd like to just journal as a participant observer, what do I see? And then compare it to some of the interventions that occur in Gestalt, which Gestalt is a very affective theory. My church was affective. And so, so I sat down and did that and, you know, was able to see what kinds of Gestalt interventions go on in the church. Later, when I was doing consulting, we were talking about consulting a little bit earlier. I was able to develop counseling programs within churches by reaching out to ministers' wives, the first lady of the church, to talk about why it's important to bring mental health into the church as one of the services that are provided to support the members of the community of the church family. And then also when I was in private practice, many times people needed to speak to their religious leader, to their faith leader, and felt more confident in talking about their issues. And so sometimes I would partner and do co-therapy with the faith leader. And that way, the faith leader felt confident that I was providing clinical services to the flock. And at the same time, the client was also getting to hear and get responses that were based upon their faith. And so we worked together in providing that for certain communities. So that, you know, to me, it's seamless, and it's part of who I am and what it is that I offer. Yes. And so, yeah, so I wanted to put that out there in talking about that. So with that in mind, I will answer the question about, you know, what's going on right now for people. So, you know, in taking a look at the research about what, you know, the trends of what's going on in terms of mental health and Black citizens, Black Americans, African Americans here, one of the things that we know is that we are often disproportionately impacted by a lot of things, by the stressors, and that we disproportionately experience stressors within this environment, and that they are layered one on top of another for people. And if it were not for the coping mechanisms that we do have, things would be a whole lot worse. So I often say that Black people are the poster child of resilience because of what it is that we've gone through, and that for all of the research that is about the problems that we have, there isn't nearly enough research about how resilient we are given what it is that we've gone through. A lot of that really rests on the shoulders of our faith. So when we think about even resistance, the people who have led acts of resistance within the Black community have almost exclusively been faith leaders. Yes. So our faith really provides us with the authority to speak out against injustice. And I think that's the most important thing for us to understand, that that has really allowed us to do that. So we've seen some research that's been out that says that, you know, when people have a strong sense of their religion as well as spirituality, both of those things, that they tend to recover faster from physical illnesses. They recover faster in terms of their mental illnesses. So it's really important for us to understand why we as mental health professionals cannot do this work alone. We need to be working within the faith-based communities in order to be most effective in working with people. We look at the research on where are people going to go. People of color, in particular, Black people, are going to go to a faith leader before they go to a licensed mental health professional. So given that, we definitely need to be partnering so that we can have religious leaders, faith-based leaders coming to us and asking us to partner with them to do work within their community, within their church and faith communities, to be able to assist. When we think about reaching out and doing COVID testing, when we talk about going out and talking about the vaccine, we're going to have to go into the church. We're going to have to go into faith-based communities because people are very hesitant. If they were hesitant before, based upon the lack of trust in the healthcare professionals, they're even more hesitant now, given our current political climate. So we really do need to come together to be able to talk about these things, because there are so many connections, there's so many reasons, there's so much evidence in the research for effective practice that there is no way that we can do this work without being able to talk about it. And I found when I was in private practice, my clients wanted to talk about their faith. And so they will lead you in, they will assess you, they will, look and determine whether or not you're open to that. And once they see you are, then they will really bring in that discussion and be able to talk about that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you for kind of giving a little bit more background and your work in private practice with faith-based organizations, your experiences in the churches. And I just also want to mention, I mentioned there's three pandemics going on right now. And I want to clarify to our listening audience, we have the COVID-19 pandemic, we have the racial injustices pandemic, and we have the mental health pandemic. And we know mental health and mental illness have been issues way before these pandemics. But what's happening right now has really shined a high beam light on some of these disparities and people who normally wouldn't have issues or problems or finding challenges and experiencing trauma. And they are saying that the results of what's happening can go on for years. So with that being said, let's help everyone understand, what is trauma?
Mm-hmm.
What is trauma and post-traumatic stress syndrome?
Right. So a lot of people have heard about post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, because I call this the sexy disorder because it's in the movies, it's on TV, it's something that's part of our nomenclature. We hear this term all the time. When we think about PTSD, we often think about military veterans, for example. I grew up in an age where there were a lot of Vietnam veterans coming back home. And so we definitely heard a lot about PTSD. We saw people we went to school with who came back and were severely emotionally and psychologically damaged as a result of seeing people die and being injured in active duty. So we know about post-traumatic stress disorder, but let's just talk about the broader concept of trauma. So when we think about trauma, usually it's a critical event or a series of events that cause emotional and psychological disturbance. Sometimes that disturbance can be crystallized and encrusted without intervention, and then it just becomes very difficult for people to get out of that. It becomes very chronic for people. It can create comorbidity, meaning that there can be other issues that come up as a result. So there could be substance abuse and trauma. There could be depression and trauma. So it's important for us to take a look at that. I would say in terms of prevalence, I don't think there's anyone who escapes it. I think if you live and breathe long enough, if you're fortunate enough to grow old, that you're going to experience some form of trauma. And some of that trauma could be just from the loss of people. Sometimes we have what's known as complicated grief, wherein someone has died, but under horrible circumstances. So we know that after Hurricane Katrina, for example, people lost family members, but it was under such horrible conditions. The shroud of, was there human error, or was it, just a natural disaster? And having gone through that years, decades earlier with Hurricane Betsy, where they had redirected the water so that they could preserve some parts of the city and de facto damage other parts. People believe that they did the same thing because during Hurricane Katrina. So people were very angry, and that anger definitely leads toward the complicated grief of not being able to sit back and really accept what has happened, or feeling that one can do something about it. Sometimes even guilt when someone has perhaps, when there's been suicide completion. Sometimes family members and friends have experienced complicated grief that is due to guilt and shame associated. Is there something that I could have done? Did I miss signs? that I should have responded to? Should I have gone over, visited? Should I have called one more time to be able to help that person? So we can experience trauma in a lot of different ways, from all kinds of things related to natural disasters, human-made disasters that occur. We can experience that. We can have an accident and experience trauma. So trauma can come in a lot of forms, and they do. And a lot of it really has to do with living and breathing and experiencing life. But whenever it causes emotional or psychological disturbance, typically we want to call it trauma. Now, a more recent concern has been something that there are several terms for it. We talk about traumatic stress. Of course, I have a center for traumatic stress, and so I investigate that. And we typically use that term in the behavioral sciences. Similar work is going on in the health sciences, and they call it chronic stress typically. But we really are talking about the same kind of thing, where there may not have been one event. It could have been just this continuous experience. Now that's being talked about in terms of marginalized communities, whether we're talking about race-based trauma, where we experience marginalization, racism, bias, prejudice, microaggressions, macroaggressions on a daily basis, from the time we wake up to the time we go to bed, that we experience those things. But also we talk about people who are religious minorities, who are marginalized because of their faith. We also have people who experience that kind of marginalization based upon their sexual orientation, based upon their physical abilities, and so on. So we know that people experience marginalization, and that marginalization, because it's structural, because it's systemic, because it people act with impunity, meaning there are systems in place to enforce that. So that's one of the reasons why we are so disturbed, why the double pandemic happened right after we were in lockdown with COVID, because police historically, so this is not all police, so I'm not saying all police are acting with brutality against Black people. But we do know historically that the law enforcement has been used to enforce white supremacy. And so you get that impunity. So they get to act and do those things to keep us in line. And this has been going on since, slavery, antebellum South, and so on. And so as we move through history, there hasn't been much change. Now, we can also look at that and say, well, we know, and we can look at history and say this also happened for many of the immigrants that came from Southern Europe, for example. And we do have examples of that. I've talked about that before. But the problem is, once we have the whitening of America, when people are no longer ethnic immigrants, and we basically just go into this constructed identity of whiteness, and then there's white, and then there's just non-white. And then you get privileges based upon your status within those two bifurcated identities. Then it becomes very difficult for people to be able to resist. And we can see that now politically, that there are these protesters who are peaceful, and yet the police are being used to enforce, to keep people in line, physically and metaphorically, to keep people in line. You are not to speak out. You are not to challenge your positioning, your social positioning in society. You are to stay in that box, or else we'll lock you up. We will imprison you. We will physically beat you until you conform to where we think you belong. And that is, again, in the margins and not in the center. Again, it has been faith-based leaders today and centuries ago who give us the moral authority to say, okay, you can beat me, but there's somebody standing behind me.
Right.
And you have to beat all of us. You're going to have to deal with that. For people to be bigger than the moment, to be larger than their individual selves, they need that moral authority. They need that strong faith to be able to do the impossible. And so, you know, again, that's why I say we're poster children for resilience, because we have gotten up and done the impossible every single time. When we look at the kind of rights that are available to the LGBTQ community, they wouldn't have gotten that had not Black people died and bled in order for those rights to be there. So we are the litmus test. You can look at us, and if you see us thriving, then you know the rest of America is doing pretty darn good. And we owe that to the faith-based community in doing that. I ask that now. Where is the faith-based community in responding to the issues that are going on right now? There was much less was going on in the 60s, and we had Black and white, you know, we had folks who were marching in the streets. So it's like I've seen housewives, white suburban women out forming a line in Seattle, in Portland, and saying, you have to go through us. Absolutely. Yes. I have not seen our faith-based leaders forming that line and speaking in the pulpit to be able to tell people, this is what needs to be done. This is how we heal. This is how we come together. So I'm a firm believer in collaborating with faith-based leaders to help to heal a community, and also to be able to give us the strength to do what needs to be done.
Absolutely, thank you. I really appreciate that discussion. We started off talking about trauma and traumatic stress and the different types of traumatic stress. I'm just curious, somebody could be listening right now and saying, well, what are those signs and symptoms that I am experiencing traumatic stress? What are those kind of common reactions that people are experiencing right now to COVID-19 that may be different than what they've experienced prior to the pandemic? Or what are some of the common reactions? You talked about the race-based traumatic stress. What are some different things people can kind of use as a list to just kind of keep in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say you definitely want to pay attention to your body, and not just stay present, be very mindful about what's going on. When you find yourself feeling melancholy and you can't identify an event, you can't connect it to an event, and you ask yourself, why am I feeling so sad? Nothing's happened to me, but I feel melancholy. I'm feeling sort of down. I'm having a depressed moment. I'm just not feeling well, right? Mm-hmm. So we want to pay attention to that. Don't, let it go. Oftentimes I hear hardworking Black women, you ask them, how you doing? They say, I can't complain. Well, I stop them and I say, hold up, come back here. Come on, ma'am. Yes, you can. Come on, complain. Tell me what's going on. I want to hear it. If nobody wants to hear it, today I'm listening. Yes. What do you need to talk about? What's on your mind? What's bothering you? And so it's important that we do that. One of the things that we know from the research that is an active and an evidence-based intervention is testifying, talking about it. Yes. So again, I'm gonna go back to my church experience. It's like, I did go to a church that was a little sedity. And sometimes our pastor, the Reverend Doctor, he would say, all right, y'all, we gone too far. We got too far. But this is, I know where y'all come from. Come on now. He'd say, let's go back to that church in the Piney Woods, right? Yes. And he would say, today I'm not gonna give you a sermon. Today, we're gonna testify. Yes. We're going to testify what we've been going through. And one by one, people would stand up and talk about what they've been going through and how they made it through, right? And then they get support. Everybody say, amen, yes, indeed, all right. And somebody else would stand up and they would talk about hardship, what they've been going through and how they made it through, right? So, you know, that was the whole service of being able to do that. I was telling a colleague of mine the other day, I said, I can remember having a church service, again, same pastor. He would say, all right, y'all getting a little too sedity. We're going to go back. And we would have a whole service and it would be moaning. That's all. We just moan, right?
Yes.
To allow people to tell the story.
Right.
Don't be ashamed. It ain't you, it's them.
Right.
So tell that story. We do that when we learn about how to deal with, you know, sexual abuse and so on, and how our client has to tell the story, you know, and I'm not saying that in a derisive way, but I'm saying it because we often hear the intervention in a Eurocentric framework about how to do it. But when I was working with my clients, I translated. So that I'm speaking to the people. It's like, I know you know what I'm talking about. It's like, just moan for a minute so that you can just feel it. Get in touch with it. Don't run from it. It's real. But you are strong enough and powerful enough and have enough faith that you can go into the depth and be brought out of the depth. You know what I'm saying? To make it, people need to know that. They need to have the emotional hand-holding. That yes, you can get through this. It can happen. And that's what our faith does. That's what our faith leaders do. That is what our faith institutions do, is that they give us that to be able to move through those experiences, to come out on the other side. And that's important. So what do we know in terms of research? One of the things that we know is that suicide for Black youth, for children, in K-12 schools, right? Suicide the rates have been doubling about every 5 years, pre-COVID. And one of the things that we know is that this idea of social isolation is very real for many people. And so we do know that suicide attempts, suicide ideation, and suicide success rates are on the rise. We also know that depression is on the rise. We also know anxiety. There's a thing now called coronavirus anxiety. It is on the rise. We also know that, I'm trying to think, the other indicator of what's going on is interpersonal violence. So we know that violence, gun violence, you know, there's just an increase in communities right now, and those are all indicators of what's going on. So back to these characteristics, what should you look for? So one is stay in touch. Also extremes, changes. If you normally are a very quiet person and you become very gregarious, you talk a lot, you know, you're outgoing, that is a sign. If you're normally a very outgoing person and you find yourself very quiet a lot, that is a sign. Our sleeping patterns are signs. Are we sleeping too much? So instead of normally, you know, the alarm goes off or the sun comes up in the morning and you're ready to go, you get up ready to start your day. If you notice that when that alarm goes off, you just turn over and you're like, I'm not ready to start the day. If you find that you tend to go to bed earlier and earlier, that you find your days are getting shorter and shorter in terms of your activity, that is a concern. You need to talk to someone about that. Eating habits, same thing. It's like if you notice that you're eating a lot or not eating, you decide, you know, I'm not hungry, I'm skipping meals. That's important for us to pay attention to. In terms of our normal, just, you know, you don't even need these complicated checklists or anything. Individuals can just ask questions. Am I changing? Am I different? Am I not myself?
Mm-hmm.
We know those things. And when we experience that, we need to reach out. We need to reach out to our faith leaders. We need to reach out to mental health professionals and be able to get assistance to get back to some sense of a normal life in being able to do that. That's also true for children. Doesn't matter what age you are. You need to watch children to see what are their eating habits, what are their play habits, what is their mood, you know? So we need to pay attention to those basic things in order for us to catch our behavior early on. We can do early intervention and get people connected. I often say that we need to vacillate between being connected and reflecting. So reflection and connection. So it's not one or the other. We do need alone time. That doesn't mean you need to be lonely.
Yes.
Alone time. So there's times when you need to go into a quiet place. You know, centuries ago, our people went into what's known as the hush hollows. Right? So only the rural people out there know what I'm talking about. Hush hollows, where people would go into this space and gather together and be in these quiet places. We need to do the same, whether we're in prayer and meditation, listening to music. We just need to just be in a quiet place to get all the noise out of our heads and clear our minds, clear our hearts, and get our spirits right to be able to move forward, to be able to have clear thought, right? And be able to do that. So we need that reflection time. We need alone time. But it also needs to be balanced with connection time. So whether that's getting on Zoom and talking to your girlfriend, you know, and doing things together. One of the things that I do with my sister is that we work out via Zoom. So we, you know, alternate each week, picking out what activity we found on YouTube, and on Zoom we're sharing that. So it's a way for us to be together. It's a way for us to be active, right? And be able to take care of that and take care of each other. Yes. So there are things that we can do to be together. We have church services that are online, so that means that folks can be able to connect to their faith institution and, you know, continue to get fed spiritually in terms of doing that. So those are some of the symptoms that we need to look for. Those are just broad strokes. And then also some things that we can do to be able to stem the tide.
Yeah, that is a great overview, and I appreciate it. I love talking about when you talked about you can just moan. I think it's important. We have to help people to understand. You have to own your feelings. And so if you don't have words to put with your feelings, just moan and get it out. And that if you suppress those feelings, we know it's going to impact people physically. And so when we talk about chronic health issues, it's holding that stress in and holding those emotions. So just moan and get it out. We also talked about, you know, these signs and symptoms. And I think it's really important people understand these are equal opportunity signs and symptoms. They don't discriminate by race, ethnicity, gender, religion. So you can be a person of color, you can be Black, you can be religious and still experience this. And again,
male.
Yeah, you can be male, absolutely. So, and I really am glad that you mentioned about suicide. And I just want to say September is National Suicide Prevention Month. And I just want to put a little plug because I know that there are people that watch this later on. There's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline that provides 24/7 free and confidential support for people in distress, prevention, and crisis. So here's the thing, you can be calling on behalf of a friend or a loved one, or if you are feeling distressed, but you do not have to have suicidal ideations to call. This is a support 24/7, and it's 1-800-273-8255. We also have the crisis text line, and it's 741-741. So when you type help, HELP, to 741-741, because these signs and symptoms and traumatic stress are real. So let's just kind of talk about, you said, you know, people don't have to suffer in silence. They can reach out to their faith-based leaders and their pastors and professional counselors. But let's talk about counseling a little bit. And what does it mean to have somebody provides culturally sensitive, trauma-informed care, culture-centered disaster mental health counseling? What does that mean?
Yes. So I'm glad you mentioned that because I talk about that all the time. So thank you so much. When I talk about culture-centered counseling, I am talking about placing culture at the center. So just to give people an idea, the training that overwhelmingly what mental health professionals receive, whether they're psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, counselors, creative art therapists, whatever they are, the emphasis is on Eurocentric values and worldviews. And when we're working with clients who do not have that particular worldview, it is on us to be able to translate that in some kind of way. So there is this spectrum then of service provision, regardless of who the person is, where they understand that and they either take the Eurocentric frameworks that we learn in our training programs and present that as is, or they modify it and try to bend it and make it more culturally recognizable to people, all the way through to the other end of the spectrum, where you have folks like me who say, I don't even want to go, I don't want to start there with the Eurocentrism and bend it. Forget it. I'm going to start here by utilizing those tools that stem from the value system of the client with whom I'm working. So I have spent my professional life developing and training to be able to offer, number one, African-centered counseling. So I specialize in that when I was in private practice. I focused on that, used that with my clients. And also I train. So when I'm teaching at the university, I also teach my students how to, first of all, I educate them because they don't have that information.
Right.
So I provide them with knowledge about culture-centered theories. And we cover not only African-centered, but also Latinx-centered,
Yes.
Native American Indian-centered, and Asian-centered. So we go through that. And I encourage them to think about using a culture-centered theory while they're in their field work, practicum and internship. It's not easy. I've only seen a few students do it because of the pressure. Their site supervisors won't be knowledgeable and they may marginalize the intern because they're using that and so on. But the idea is to have the cultural worldviews at the center. So for instance, one of the things that we know about Eurocentrism is that it's very individualistic. The culture is very individualistic. To be autonomous is key. That our parenting moves in that direction, the way schools are structured and the socio-cultural development of children moves toward autonomy. If you think about how a classroom is structured, you have individual desks. Yeah. Nobody ever thought about that, that it is promoting individualism. And to give you an idea, I remember I provided a university-wide lecture at, I was up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. And as I often do when I come into a community, I ask that they have me to meet with community stakeholders the day before, so that I have permission to come into the community. Now, the reason for that is because so often when we, as people of color, are brought in, we're positioned, we're juxtaposed to something. So I don't know when I come in to talk whether or not they've had some big event where there's been some racist event or something, and I'm being brought in to support who knows who,
Right.
and what side. So I would rather rely on the community to find out what is the backstory to me coming here. Why are they spending that money to have me to come? Because presumably there are experts already in the community. So why are you bringing me in? And the community will talk to me and tell me what's going on. And then they'll tell me, well, no, we want you to speak, but we want you to definitely mention this and this and this and this. I'm like, okay, I understand what you're saying, because there are similar issues that go on in other communities. So I have some sense of what you're talking about, and thank you. And I literally asked the question, do I have permission to speak in your community? So this is really wonderful. So I had that experience in that area, found out that there was an Oneida Nation there. And growing up in upstate New York, I heard Oneida, and I'm like, wait a minute. There were Oneida people there when I was growing up. Is there any relationship? And they said, yeah, we migrated. And I was like, what? Get out of here. So it was so amazing. I connected with them. They then invited me to come to the reservation, where they had an elementary school, and then they had a secondary school, and they had their governance there and so on. And I got a tour. I met the school counselor, and guess what? They didn't have individual desks. So I said, yes, when we are in our right minds, when we think according to our own worldviews, then what comes out as outcomes are very different. And counseling is all about getting into someone's head, what we call phenomenology. We like to get into the client's head. So what does that mean when we have white values, white worldviews, and our job is to get into someone's head? So is that going to cause a problem? Maybe so. So it's important for us to be thinking about those values and have them at the center. It's even more important when trauma has occurred, because we want to intervene as aggressively as possible. So that means that we want to get as close to their way of thinking as possible. We don't want to waste time trying to interpret. Instead, if we're speaking the same language culturally, we can go right to it and intervene expediently, as counselors do. So that is what I mean. To that end, I will say this before we finish. You know about my Culture Center Disaster Mental Health Credentialing Program that I created in partnership with Mental Health Academy in Australia. So far, we've had a little under 200 people globally to complete the training, but we've had almost 700 people who have registered and are still going through the training. So what I'm doing is hopefully transforming the way in which we think about providing disaster response by thinking about the culture of the people. I also developed 10 videos that are online for parents, for childcare providers, for mental health professionals to be able to work with young children, 0 through 5, 6, 7. And I demonstrate the intervention. So I talk about culture-centered, trauma-informed interventions with young children. They're free, they're open source. You can just go to the playlist in YouTube, and they are grab and go. You can watch the video. They're all about 10 minutes long. Watch the video. If you have a client tomorrow and you're going to be working with a young child, watch one of those videos and try to use one of the interventions. Please contact me and tell me how you're using it. But my latest baby is I've created a brand new culture-centered trauma-informed care program for schools, because I don't know of any of the trauma-informed care programs in schools that are culture-centered. So the one that I'm designing is for children of color. And so that will be released probably next month, October.
Oh, that is phenomenal. Congratulations. I also just want to mention, because I've watched those videos on YouTube and they're phenomenal. So take advantage of those resources. Tell people how they can learn more about the training programs and where they should go if they have questions or want to contact you.
Yes. So the easiest thing in social media, I am Dr. CWO. So Dr_CWO, my initials, Dr. CWO, as the students call me. So you can reach me on Instagram, on Twitter, in Facebook. I'm Dr. Cirecie West-Olatunji. I have a page there. I'm on LinkedIn, also Dr. CWO. So you can reach me through that very easily, and you can ask me. I'll send you the link to the disaster mental health counseling credentialing program. If you're interested in the trauma-informed care, that is the CREST program, CRESTS program.com. So you can just go right to the website, take a look, and we should be able to have some links up for you to be able to participate in the training.
Sounds good. Now, I know we have a few minutes. I haven't seen any questions in the chat box. So if anybody has questions, just please type them in the chat box. So as we come to an end, because I see there are caretakers on that I am aware of, there's counselors that are on, I see a deacon, I see a pastor. Let's quickly talk about self-care. Why is self-care important for these helping professionals who are in the trenches, and what does self-care look like?
Yes, so the problem with caring for people is that you can care too much. It's called burnout.
Yes.
You know, and so what happens is that your ability to help erodes. You may think you're doing a good job, but you're not. Okay, so I've experienced burnout. There's nobody who is immune to it. If you're in the trenches, I've done disaster work, and yes, I've been called out where people are telling me, you know, as much as you smile, Cirecie, I haven't seen you smile in a couple of days, so take a day off. So it can happen to anyone to be able to do that, but burnout is the cost of caring. So what you need to do, it's amazing. The best intervention, the best prevention intervention is drink lots of water. How about that?
Yes.
Free, right? Yes. Drink lots of water. We should always remember that, to hydrate. It's really important. Second, breathe. We need to get oxygen to the brain. It allows us to think better, make better decisions. And so it's really important for us to do things. Now, of course, if you're exercising, you typically are breathing quite well. So it means that we need to exercise. We need to get moving and be able to do that. So drinking water, exercising, we need to know our limits. So it typically means that our load is too heavy. So we need to lighten our load. And for people who are caregivers, people who serve humans, that's a hard thing for us to do, because we think we need to keep on going. But really, we have to tell ourselves, let me take a break and come back. You know, I always say that counseling and all forms of mental health therapy is a tag team effort. We can't always be in there, but we need to have buddies. We need to have colleagues where we can say, you know, I'm going to go on vacation. So I'm going to leave everything in your care. I trust you. I have faith that you will do well, and I'll be back. I believe that my clients can make it. They'll be fine. They're in good hands. I'm going to just tag out and rejuvenate, replenish. If you think about it in terms of your car, you even have to fill up your car every now and then. It runs out of gas. And what happens to your car when you run on empty? You can damage your car, right? So we don't want to do that. So, you know, gas up, you know, relax, get yourself together and come back strong to be able to help. So we need to hydrate, drink lots of water. We need to eat well, get the nutrients. So don't snack, and definitely avoid alcohol. And I love me a glass of wine. I do. But we need to do it in moderation, right? We all learned about moderation. Let me say one thing, because I know it's 8 o'clock, it's 9 o'clock your time, about I know you wanted to ask me before, what else would I like to say?
Yes.
And that is that if you love someone, wear a mask and social distance. And we need to see that as a form of love. Think about the parable of the 10 virgins.
Yes.
The 5 who were prepared and wise, and the 5 who were foolish, they weren't prepared. Being prepared means you wear a mask, you social distance.
Absolutely. That is wonderful. Thank you so much for being on Talking with Dr. T tonight. I greatly appreciate you. And this was all great information. I also want to mention to our listening audience, if you're needing assistance with identifying and finding multicultural and social justice competent counselors, the Association for Multicultural Counseling and Development can help with that. American Counseling Association, Psychology Today. You can contact either of us. And it's really important. I want to say to our churches, our faith-based organizations, let's continue the collaboration. The more we can do to collaborate, the more we're going to be able to help our congregants. And it may look a little different right now in a virtual environment, but with technology, we still can focus on that collaboration. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you again. Dr. Cirecie, I just enjoyed listening to you and hearing about the research and the connection. So I greatly appreciate you. Everyone have a phenomenal night.
Good night.
Good night.